Welcome to another edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. My name is Jamal Bindon. I'm the chair of the board of Movement Omaha for Race Equity. An organization deals with anti-racism and challenging institutions and organizations and individuals as they display some of these negative traits and behaviors in our community. Today we have with us is Cammy Watkins, who is an Omaha native with 20 years of working not-for-profit organizations. She's also worked in affordable housing. She's also been involved in performing arts administration. I met her when she was the director of Inclusive Community, and also this is a group, we'll talk more about that deals with race and diversity issues in our community and our state. This organization helps organizations integrate diverse groups within various city, county, and state agencies. Um, They've also conducted trainings for many nonprofits and government agencies in our state and our community. And I invited Cami to discuss race relations from their perspective and the challenges they will be working on in the landscape we're dealing with all this partisan mentality and some of the negativities in our community and pushback on diversity, equity, and inclusion nationwide. She will offer feedback on how nonprofits can demonstrate the outcomes of racial healing and also how we talk about the concept of cultural humility, which is an effort to help us bridge some of those gaps. Cami, welcome to Throwing Down Some Heavy Light.
Thanks for having me.
Cami, before we start off, first, can you share with the viewing and participant audience a little bit more about yourself?
As you shared, I was born and raised in Omaha. And actually, I like to say two and a half generations deep because my mother was born and raised here. My grandma came here when she was 15. So majority of her life had spent here. Uh, my family's roots are based in Arkansas. And so as part of that Great Migration is when we came up here. And my grandmother was number 12 of 13. And for me, it's really important to like set those roots. In about 2019, 2018 to 2019, I took an identity journey, and it was important for me to understand what my roots are of my family in America, because I think oftentimes we talk about like finding our DNA of our ancestries, which is important, but there's so much of the Black experience where I have felt like I was an outsider and that I didn't necessarily belong or deserve to step into positions of leadership because of my experiences growing up, going to always PWI schools, being here in Omaha. I just had a separation from my Blackness that was something I had to reconcile. So I needed to have a better understanding and a sense of how we're connected here and how, regardless of how I show up, that there is a diaspora. We are not a monolith as a people, and there's not one way to be Black. And once I was able to really kind of build those bridges for myself, it really helped set me on the trajectory of how I want to show up in the world and how do I want to support others. And so I've only worked in my professional life as a nonprofit professional because I know that my purpose in life is to help change the world. And however that happens is just kind of what I feel called to in the moments. But that's just really what I know is to have an impact is I will have done what I'm supposed to do on this planet.
Mhm. Inclusive Community used to be the National Conference of Christians and Jews. How did your organization evolve from that national or that parent organization, which you are now?
Yeah, so inclusive communities in 2006, 2005 is when we got our own official individual 501(c)(3). So the national organization started in Omaha in 1938, and it was actually started by businessmen. The parent organization was started in New York in 1927, and coincidentally, that original organization was created because there was a presidential election, and there was a candidate that was being particularly discriminatory against, at the time, Catholics, because Protestant was the predominant faith-based religion. And so some faith leaders and political leaders got together and were like, this isn't part of the American values. There is this brotherhood of man, and that no one should have to live with a sense of discrimination. So that was the impetus of the beginning of the 1927 group. Omaha's was also started by businessmen who there was a secret boycott to Jewish owned businesses. And so they decided that that approached our founders to join in on that. And they said, because he was a Christian, that he would be in support of this. And he said, absolutely not. And so then they started this. Now, That organization has been working behind the scenes since then. In Omaha, they were kind of it was that chapter focus where the national office in New York really decided everything that would happen on the state level. Well, in 2004, 2005 timeframe, the local chapters really decided that they needed greater autonomy and wanted to be able to do this work as what was necessary within their communities and have more control over their funding and their fate. And so many of them closed that decided not to kind of stick with it, but the Omaha chapter, we decided to stay open and we've been focused through there ever since. And our mission has really remained basically the same of confronting prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination.
By the way, how large is your staff and how big is your budget in terms of the number served, things like that?
So our staff right now is at 9, and our planned budget was at 2.1 million. But budgets are mythical creatures, and so best laid plans. That's what we aim for in terms of our funding requests and what we're trying not to spend over. And then our community served in 20. Since our fiscal year runs August to September, I don't have for that yet, but for 2024 fiscal year, we were just under 800 folks that
Gotcha.
were served through our programming.
One of your mission aims to include African American males on your board or in your system, I think, of staff, obviously to be credible messengers because you include all folks. How can organizations be inclusive when our respective populations are not included in the table? Basically, what I'm saying is it's common in many nonprofits in this community not to have African American males on their board or on their staff and so on, and they have these great white savior mentalities or these certain organizations. So if we have a diverse community, how do we make sure that we have that particular group has been denigrated so much? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think like there's the writings of an author, Lily Zhang, who talked about it's the book is called DEI Deconstructed.
Hmm.
And it talks so much, and there is a piece in there where Lily describes the difference between community-led and community responsive. And that this finding the balance between making sure that you have a representative leadership is based upon your responsibility and your connectedness to the communities. And so in communities where we're looking at what some like the Gandhi notion of how do you make sure that you're providing services for the last child. And the last child is essentially the most marginalized person within a community. And so many nonprofits talk about shifting through having that kind of community responsive because they're oftentimes not community led. And we've really tried to aim towards that. And honestly, it's hard for me to say to other organizations, this is how you need to run your organization if I'm not able to model that myself. So many things that we just try to do is we try to live the values that we talk about or what we share or what we encourage others to do to show that it's possible. So in our board, we've been working, representation is really key, but because our organization doesn't just focus on race, we truly believe in the need for intersectionality, that we cannot get by, that if we want the just society that we envision, that's strengthened by diversity and inclusion and respect and justice and equity, we have to focus on the intersectionality and knowing that the experiences of a Black queer male is different than a Black straight man. And the experiences of a white, straight, disabled man is different than a white, straight, able bodied woman. And so we really try to look at all aspects of identity. And so when I'm putting my board together, I'm asking the question of like whose perspective may not be represented in this and what is going to be necessary for us to make holistic intersectional decisions for our community. And saying that like having somebody that not in that tokenism kind of I represent all people that are in a wheelchair, but has a greater sense of what is needed for kind of a community sense of connectedness and collaboration and health and just well-being.
The reason I throw it is because I know a lot of these nonprofits have never set foot in North Omaha. Some of them don't have any Latinos on their board or leadership, but yet they purport to get money from it. And so one of the things we're always pushing is if an organization is really going to serve different people in our state and our community, you have to make sure that you have that smorgasbord or that rainbow look. I want to switch up and ask you, we're into the new year, and what is inclusive community going to do differently to meet the needs of our society in light of all the stuff that's going on today?
Yeah, so we really don't have the luxury to fight uh because lawsuits are going to be expensive. And so I'm grateful for organizations like the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Social Justice, and then also ACLU that are able to do those pushing back on the policies that are coming up that are really criminalizing and just scapegoating folks that do work in the diversity, equity, inclusion field. So what we have realized we need to do is just kind of go back to our roots, because as I said when I was giving the introduction about the organization, like this organization has been doing work under the sense that every person has the right to live with a sense of dignity without the fear of discrimination, regardless of their identities, not in spite of. And so we are going back to that and looking at what's our key pieces and what are the things that have shaped and what are the best ways in which we can try to bring about this just society. And so we're really honing in on our leadership development work. As I've talked with folks, and just something that I really believe, like, what are the competencies that are missing most, which could have the deepest impact in creating the change in the world that we need to see? And I think it's courage. And so this year for our team, we've deemed this the year of courage, where we're trying to build courageous leaders, elevate courageous voices, and then celebrate courageous change makers. And it's all about, like, how do we create a world where everyone has the courage to confront prejudice, bigotry, and discrimination? Like, that's a 30-year goal for us. And so to get to this, especially in a time where fear is driving so much of these choices, and we have leaders that are just manufacturing and promoting fear as the way to distract us from what's really important in our society. We need people who have courage, which is not, courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the ability to be afraid, but to do it anyway, because we know that the greater good and the possibilities of what comes on the other side of us really striving to fight for what's right and what's fair for all people.
I was made aware that your staff last year took a trip to Oklahoma to the National Federation, I think the annual conference. Also, we know during that training, you also went to Wall Street, Black Wall Street, which was in Tulsa, Oklahoma, obviously. You also, I think, went to the Native American Museum and so on places. What was that like, and how will that outcomes help our community here in Omaha or your organization by going to that out of town place?
I can speak for myself and say that it was really great to be able to stand in history in that way. And knowing that we have so much living history in those places, similar things like that in Omaha, but our history is hidden. And Black Wall Street, it's sitting there, like it's very obvious. I loved when we were walking down when we had our tour, and there's the storefronts of the existing buildings there, but then they have bricks on the sidewalk that has the year and the name of the business that was there before the burning and the bombing, and the white riots that took over that community. And it says, like, what year they started, who was there, and if they rebuilt or not, and when. And I think that's the part of the story for me that was most unknown, but the most inspiring for how we can bring this back here, is that through all of that destruction, a majority of the businesses that were on that street before the bombings and the fires came back, and they rebuilt, and they were there. They existed for much longer than of course, the highway came through. So it was just the story of resilience. And I think it feels cliche for us to say, like, this experience of, like, resilience within the Black community, but like at some point, I would like us to not have to be so resilient, and can we just thrive? But that is who we are. And this possibility that folks can do everything, like literally bomb you, and you can come back and be just as strong, if not stronger than before. So that sense, and there was, they have the uh, James Baldwin quote on the museum that says, like, not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing that it, I always mess it up. I should have written it down, but everything, nothing can be changed unless it's faced, but not everything that is faced can be changed. And so I have started using that mantra to shape how we do our conversation series through Omaha Table Talks, which is the idea that what we're trying to do through the conversations is start to have things that need to be changed be faced, because oftentimes people are talking, but they're not actually having dialogues. They're not having conversations that are about how do we change our opinions, change our mindsets, and be able to change what we haven't been facing and we've been glossing over and ignoring. So those are just a couple of the things that from that trip we brought back here to kind of try to promote and build through, which is why also that community building. We recognize that there's a lot of opportunity here to create greater collaboration, because nothing that happened on Black Wall Street, and then also even at the Native American History Museum, seeing the resilience of the indigenous communities and the ways in which it was a lot of that kind of collaboration and community that helped keep them going through the just multitude of atrocities that try to keep bury them, really.
hmm as you mentioned that, there's a person who worked at Tri-Faith. We were at Augustine Luther Church showing a video called A Time for Building, which is a subsequent video to The Time for Burning that Senator Chambers was a star in. And one of the staff members from that organization stood up in front of everyone and said, I grew up in Tulsa. I didn't know anything about Wall Street. I'm like, how is that possible in a city that has such a horrific history of what they did to African Americans? Of course, the government played a great role in that. The other thing that most people don't understand, some people say there was up to 300 people who were murdered or genocide, how they played that in that city, but they downplayed the numbers because they hid it. Of course, the local newspapers, just like the old forerunner of the Omaha World Herald, played up, the whole issue of how lynchings took place here. So that was that. Let me switch up and ask a different question. Moore has noted that there's some so-called race-based or focused agencies who, like, I'm gonna say the Latino Center of the Midlands, the Urban League, so on. They say they purport to serve people of color, but when you ask them for data on their webpage or Facebook, you can't find it from them. And so my question is, how do you indicate, or what are the quality service you can show when you work in a faith-based agency like yours? In other words, you threw out some numbers of served, but how do you know if they're doing a good job or a bad job? Because I see money pump into some of these nonprofits, and it seems like they're not busting a grape. They're sitting around having picnics, and they show pictures on Facebook of eating at the table, kibbles and bits, whatever they eat. But my point is, how do you measure effectiveness in race advocacy or race improvement, racial humility in our community?
Yeah, so that's the golden ticket question. So we have set as part of, so within our 30-year goals, we kind of set benchmark goals that are for us to achieve within the first 3 years. So this is the first, we're in year two of our first 3 years of our strategic planning, towards our strategic visions and directives. And one of those goals is to create mechanisms to measure impact. Because we recognize that for too long, most nonprofits, we only measure satisfaction and who is coming and who is attending. And we're not actually looking to see, are we actually making progress towards what we're trying to change? So that's one of the goals that we've set forth. We work with, Veronica on our team is really leads this up, but she's been seeking out um, local and has also had conversations with folks through our national network. So while the National Conference for Christians and Jews doesn't exist, we still have a national partnership with organizations that were former NCCJs. And some of them have already started to do the same kind of research of how do we make sure that we are actually having an effect on race equity in the community. We can anecdotally talk about the people that have come through our programs, and like our Inclusivity program is actually in its 25th anniversary. And so one of the things we're starting to do now is capturing the storytelling, because I think too often we only go for academic data as the only way to tell the story of success and impact. But I think there is power in the human experience and our lived experience. So
hmm
that's one of the ways that we're trying to identify impact, in just in contacting folks that have gone through the program and asking them, can you tell us a story and how this has shifted, or if it had a part of a directory or your trajectory in life and where you are today. And like it started with Precious Brady Davis, who is, she lives in Illinois now, but she wrote a memoir. And there's a whole chapter about her experience at our Inclusivity camp and how pivotal it was in shaping who she is today as the activist that she is, as like the first Black trans woman to hold an elected office in Cook County, Illinois. So like we're getting those pieces. So now we've got to try to figure out finding evaluators that can create the questions to identify, is there clear impact here? One of the ways that we do know that we've done the best at this has been our Inclusivity program, which is we have a pre and post. In that one, we have been measuring evaluation for the students in the system the longest since my tenure, so about 8 years, because I'll be at 8 years on February 10th. We are actually finding through our measurements that we are affecting behavior change, not just kind of knowledge and awareness growth, which is what typically we've been measuring. We're actually seeing that being able to impact behavior change from in just 4 days from the information. So that's something we want to start to do now for our adult programs and being able to look back because we're finishing up year 6 of our lead diversity program. And so I want to use that as the catalyst to try to design an impact study on, has this program, which goal is to try to create greater opportunities and change the experiences around diversity, equity, inclusion on kind of a collective impact focus
Mhm.
in the business community and in the workplaces. So now we're going to try to see how we can develop. And that's the hard part, is because when you talk to a lot of researchers, they're only used to doing data surveys or reviews, and they're not actually often asked to create, what does it look like to measure actual impact? Are we changing the needle or pushing anything around race equity or even gender equity and the like?
Mhm. We're going to try and get through a couple questions. We open up exactly at half past the hour. At one point, you were on the board of Omaha Plantation Housing Authority dealing with bed bugs. What caused you to jump ship during that time?
Well, first of all, I realized that that was a volunteer experience. And there was a lot that was happening. And as a community, a person that likes to be community responsive, um, at the time when I left was right around the time that several of the people, the like advocates and the activists that were pushing, they were calling for a change in leadership on that board. And I couldn't ignore that request because folks are like, we need to make space. These people aren't doing anything, and all of them, and things are continuing to get worse. And I recognize that I actually didn't have the power to do much other than keep voicing, like, all right, here are the questions. Can I try to connect you? But at the end of the day, it was,
So you
I
had
didn't
other
have
board members there. Are you saying none of the other board members could get rid of incompetence or malfeasance because they couldn't solve a basic issue like bed bugs? And there was not the critical mass to make that happen, is what you're saying?
like, I can't speak for the other board members, but I can say that I know that I wasn't able to make a difference in that. And at the end of the day, it's like, this is a volunteer role. And it's, if I can't have a big enough impact on something, I'm not going to stay there. And especially when community members are calling for change.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm going to come down. Like, you want change, and I'm not going to give the excuse that, well, we can't change. We don't have space to add new people. I won't be part of the reasoning for why, well, the people here are doing a great job. I was like, because I know that I'm not, because I'm not being able to make the do the things that folks are calling for the board to do as an individual. And it's a group situation. So I was just like, I can go. I will
Wow.
step down.
You know what's unfortunate is here we have one of the richest country in the world that's throwing lots of millions and billions of dollars down rat holes, and we can't get rid of bed bugs in the senior citizen housing unit. It's like crazy. I'm still looking at this time here. You ran for city council, but you were unsuccessful. What suggestions we have for women, and particularly women of color, running for city council or county commission in this community? Because oftentimes there's not always a lot doing that. But what did you learn from that experience? Or you
Um,
others, in other words.
uh, I, you know, what did I learn? I learned a lot about the political system here, and that too many people see it as a game.
Mm,
And then I see that it's a game that is rigged, and it is a game that many people don't like, but no one has the courage to change it.
wow.
Um, and that was most disheartening for me. There are
Mm,
definitely people that I felt like I know to be good people, but they make choices to the end of protecting the power of the game versus to supporting the greater good for the community.
So let me translate that. In other words, they're more self-serving to keeping the status quo versus helping their constituents or the community, right? Is that
Yep.
what you're saying?
Yeah. And like I often talk about like it's fake power. Like the city council, all of these things are fake power, and we are willing to kind of sell out folks that trust and believe in us to maintain power that's not even real. Because at the end of the day, it has to be a collaborative effort
Right,
on that board. And we all have to agree that we want to make a difference. But if we get too caught up, and so many folks in there were caught up in just this is what is my it's my time, it's my turn. I'm
right,
here because I want this versus like I'm here because there's been a call for a need. And I it's like myself, along with the multitude of the other women and activists that ran
hmm,
in that time, because 2021 was such a historic election because we had all of these folks who none of us had um, a chance to win. Many of us didn't expect to win, and that wasn't our only goal. Our goal was we kept seeing problems in our community, and they weren't being addressed by the people who have the opportunity to work together to at least try to elevate the issue, if not try to solve it. So we wanted to make sure that those issues did not get continue to get ignored. And I would say in many ways we were successful. So while I did not win that race, I'm proud of the outcome from it because you can't talk about city work now because of not just because of me alone, but everyone else that was running without talking about housing. City council candidates were not talking about affordable housing prior to 2021. It
hmm.
might be a small little byline, but it was not something that was jammed in. They weren't talking as much about mental health. They weren't talking about poverty in our communities. It was always potholes and taxes is
Well,
what
and,
was the
and
main
and
thing.
and the sad thing about it, and I write to my city council, Amy Milton. She's yet to write me back recently. I write to the Human Relations Director, Equal Opportunity Commission. I want to do a show with them. They don't respond. I'm saying, give me back my tax money. Why do you have elected officials by district elections? They don't return phone calls, and so at the end of the day, get rid of them. As Trump is doing a lot of elimination, Department of Education. I say that because people become frustrated, and some of us don't understand the level of frustration, not only in terms of African Americans, but other people by these functionaries who won't come in the community. And I know that I got one question to ask you before we switch over to the audience. What would you do if you had a magic wand to improve race relations or integration in this city? And again, you could do anything. What is the thing that you would suggest we do collectively if there was a magic wand? And notice I use the word magic wand.
We need a change in leadership. I will say that was something else that I noticed while we were in Oklahoma was the right leader can move mountains.
Mm,
The mayor of Tulsa is a white, straight Republican male,
hmm.
but he was on the city council before he ran for mayor. And he ran for mayor because he got introduced to the statistic. And at this point, and I think this is part of where we have to be better about being angry or when somebody has to come on to the boat with us to jump on board with understanding racial equity issues. Like, however you come, when you come, if you come with the ability to make the change, I'm welcoming you onto the ship. He found out the statistic that in the zip codes where the majority of Black Tulsans live, children live 11 years shorter than
Wow.
white children. And that statistic stuck with him so deeply that he decided he was running for mayor and he was running on that,
Wow.
on
Very.
changing that statistic. And he spent his entire 2 terms, because they have term limits in office, trying to change that problem.
Yeah, that's powerful to hear because I know Ben Salzer refers to our current mayor as Queen Mayor because she's incompetent in dealing with our community. The only time you see them is Juneteenth and they walk down in their Bermuda shorts and throw some candy to the kids and this silly and stupid stuff that they do. It's almost embarrassing. But again, I need to stop there and open it up to the audience to participate. So at this point, we'd like to open it up. If you'd like to unmute your mic, make a comment, say anything. Again, this is freedom of speech. They have not taken away the Constitution yet, but so you have a chance to participate, bystanders, victims, and perpetrators. This is your time. So go for it. Anyone has a question, if you want to put it in the chat, we can do that. But again, at this point, we let Cammy for the most part, we respond to other comments and so on. And again, keep it brief because we want to get as many different viewpoints on the table at this point. And so we got 30 minutes to run with this section.
I see Anthony's hand is up.
Anthony, go for it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Benden. Hey, Cammy, good
You can
to.
call me Al Jamal. I'm very informal.
I know, but I was raised right, man.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
like,
Well, I want you to know I'm an elder. Today's my 70th birthday. I throw that out. And I'm not
what?
accepting gifts. I'm not accepting gifts, but I just like to remind people I'm 70 years old now. Go for it.
Mazel tov to your birthday. Well, yeah, Cammy, I appreciate it. In my ins and out of the last 8 years here, I have heard this sort of like call for new leadership. And because I'm with Ajamal, I'm definitely not satisfied with specifically Black leadership. I think it's really lacking. So my question is, do we need like more new leaders, or do we need more strong people so we don't need strong leaders in the
Wow.
vein of the great Ella Baker?
Wow.
Yeah, I love me some Ella Baker, and I talk a lot about what we need are leaders that are about servant leadership.
Mm,
And I think the kind of term new leaders can be loaded because people assume new leaders mean just younger people, but I think new leaders can does not have a generation tied to it. Because we have young people that are leading that can also be leading us astray. But I think I think it goes back to we need courageous leaders.
mm,
And a courageous leader recognizes when they need to be in front and when they need to be in the back, when they need to be a guide to support and uplift another person to elevate, and when I need to be the person who's at the microphone. And so I think that's the type of leadership that we need. And I think that comes from that sense of collaborative leadership. I think and I want to say feminine leadership and not female, but that kind of yin and yang from the sense of like masculine and feminine, that there are certain qualities and competencies and traits that are masculine and those that are feminine, and that they aren't just held in men or women, but I think feminine leadership is about a love and compassion and care and collaboration, and recognizing that we as a community are stronger together, and that this is a great relay race. And if I am trying to think that I have to run this entire marathon alone and not pass the baton to another person who has the skills to run this leg, or we're running side by side when we see our blind runners run with their collaborator, I think like that's the type of leadership that we need today. This individualistic, capitalistic kind of patriarchal system of how we've been told leadership needs to look, that's not the path. And so new leadership needs to look more. And it's if we think back to our ancestors and in many indigenous cultures, communal leadership was the way we were running
mm,
things. And so
mm.
we lost that in American society, and we need to get back to it.
I want to ask both of y'all a question, and Cammy, I want you to focus on it. I hear a lot of these young whippersnappers talking about their advocates and this and that, and I've never seen them bust a grape. And maybe Anthony, you could respond brief because I know other people want to comment. But how do you measure leadership when you see so much degradation and negativity in our community? I see people who serve on school boards who don't say a word, they won't bust a grape. I see folks that never seen wrote a letter. So how would you measure empirically that there's leadership? Particularly these new age people who don't have time to give updates on their programs. You never see them say anything else, and they jump up and they want to pull out their shirts and say like they're all this. So my question, very succinctly, what is the quality of leadership that you would say you distinguish a leader versus a follower or bystander or a suck up?
So first of all,
Mm.
I think we need to understand that just because a person is in a elected position or a decision-making position does not make them a leader.
Gotcha. Well, we've seen that in Omaha.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, okay, gotcha. Anthony, did you want to respond?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would say two things because I have some experience with Cammy when she was a candidate, and Cammy had to hold me back when something went down, and I did it because I respect her so much. But one thing I can say about Cammy is in working with her, her leadership was shown in the fact that she learned about how city council runs, right?
Okay.
Like understanding what a city council member can and cannot actually do. And you heard that demonstrated by the fact that she said you're just one vote out of seven, right? So understanding how that works and understanding also that sometimes we have to do things through the ballot initiative, which means you're going to have to work with other communities to overturn city council
Gotcha.
to get something
Gotcha.
on. So that's
I see
one.
what you're saying. That makes
But
sense.
so I haven't seen that at least in CD2, City Council District 2, where I live, and we everybody's running right now, and we're
Well,
hearing
who
this
isn't
cycle.
running? I mean, well, they could do a census tract.
Yeah, no,
Fucking
for real.
seven,
Like,
eight candidates. I think might have to dog catcher running for city council. Oh, yeah.
well, we hear the same like sort of recycled talking points, economic development, jobs, police accountability, but no one talks about like the mechanisms of city council, which is what Cammy did. Cammy also talked about this sort of need for a climate action plan. The one that we got wasn't that great, but she did talk about it. I would say that the other thing is, and I've said this to you, Ajmal, like I think that the first role of any nonprofit and the first role of any organizer is to organize themselves out of business.
Right,
Um,
right,
and it's supposed to be about redistribution of power
right,
and putting other people in a position where they don't need you anymore.
right.
And I
Work
think
yourself
that's
out of a job. You're
lacking.
right.
Yeah, yeah, that's all. Yeah, so that's my answer to that.
Gotcha. Appreciate it. Other feedback, other reactions. I know there's some folks sitting on the sideline who want to say something. Open up your mic and say something. Has anybody got any comments and so on? It's freedom of speech still that hasn't been taken away. There is a constitution in the country, okay? Yes. It's an amazing number of folks who will tell you after the fact, oh, I wanted to say this.
Well, and I do want to point out my mama did join. So happy birthday, Ajamal, while we're waiting for folks to
Thank
say.
you. Thank you. I might get a cupcake one day with a matchstick and blow it out and call it my cupcake. Anyway, go ahead. Stop it. Go feedback.
Wait,
Anybody
your
else?
mom joined? Oh my gosh.
There's at least, how many people got here? 12 people here and they're all silent and mute. Did the Trumpites get y'all already ready? This is throwing out heavy light. We get to talk. What's freedom here?
Watkins, how you doing? This is Polto Biden. I'm driving right now, but I wanted to ask you a quick question. Um, my question to you is, what are some of the initiatives or some of the agendas that Inclusive Community is pushing for the year 2025? Obviously, we're in a new president has taken office, and there's new challenges and agendas that we need to kind of confront. Tell me more about what Inclusive Communities is doing in regards to that. Thanks.
Yeah, yeah. So one of the things that I'm wanting to really have us get back focused on is youth engagement and that youth leadership development conversations that I'm having with educators and those is that we want to make sure that our youth are ready for the future they're about to inherit. And that one of that the things that they need to be ready to confront the discrimination and the leadership that is in place aren't taught in the classroom. And we recognize that our camp and our youth programming is probably that's like the hardest place to access as an entry point for our work because it's only open to those who have a school district or a school that is willing to bring us in. So we are now trying to look at opportunities for us to get into the points where there are youth who could really benefit from the tools and the resources, and then just really the community love and support and the opportunity to be seen, valued, and just appreciated for who they are as they are in all of the aspects of their cultural identity and bring that programming to them. So we're kind of working more to identify community partners that are already in relationship with youth, whether it be community groups, corrections, systems impacted youth, and trying to help there. So that's one piece is getting deeper in supporting youth related organizing skill development so that they can be ready to start really addressing the way the world is shifting for us. The second is we are working to be better collaborators for community-based organizations. We've got some of the best organizers on our team, and we've got resources. And what we're finding, we're just like kind of so tired of going to um, governmental entities and community engagement things that are about to trying to bring in community members, but it's never done effectively. And it's actually not done through the lens of supporting or hearing community voice. So now we are kind of that behind the scenes underground folks that are going and tapping on the window or making a phone call to say, hey, I saw that you might be struggling with this. Can we help? Because at the end of the day, I'm tired of my city just having the status quo and having the same things happen over and over again. And I'm also tired of seeing my activist friends running into brick walls every time that they're trying to get things done because we just keep doing things the same way. Well, and it's not always necessarily because we don't have good leaders, but there's spaces where that leader doesn't have, they aren't in power in shifting that thing. So if I can change the system or the process to be a better way, and if our organization can support by shifting the process, because sometimes it's just a process problem that leads to the lack of action or the lack of impact. So if we can help improve that and have people give them a different way of approaching a problem, stretching the way that their mindset is around looking at a problem like economic development. If you aren't talking about environmental kind of degradation and poor people in your economic development plan, you're not actually talking about economic development. So that's the other kind of plan and goal that we have right now. And we've been kind of doing this since our fiscal year started in September, is making phone calls and connecting with folks who are parts of systems that maybe may not be the leader of that system, but have the ability to make shifts and changes within it.
Quick question related to that. You said schools come into your program as young people, whatever. What about parochials or Catholic schools? Are they involved in any of this? I mean, I know back in the day, I wondered if they were using their monocultural staff or their literally all white institutions to participate in diversity. Are they part of your any of your programs?
Yeah, yeah, we do have some Catholic schools that have engaged. Creighton Prep, I would say, is one that has been with us the longest.
Hmm.
And there's some amazing young men that have come through that program and through our programs with them. We've had even elementary schools. Now that's mostly then the educators have come to
Oh,
us
the
for
teachers
programming.
versus the students.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
And then we are excited. There's a new project coming on the horizon, which is a summit, a youth summit, and that's a mix of parochial schools and public schools. So we're excited to have that as well, because I think if we can kind of break down some of those barriers and stereotypes, because we've learned from our engagement with the young men at Creighton Prep that there are people there that have similar experiences and identities as the kids in the public schools, and this assumption of who the other is created dissonance in our community that doesn't need to be there. And we can break down those barriers by bringing those folks together. But that's the same way also why it's really important for us to have that rural students. So we have students from Grand Island
Oh,
that
wow.
come in and go to our camps, because I truly believe that the experiences of poor white youth and poor youth in rural communities are can run parallel to the experiences, especially when it comes to systems impact and poverty in the inner cities.
Wow. Other questions, other feedback, other reactions. If you're shy, you can throw something in the chat and I will try to read what you say. By the way, have you done anything with the police department? I know the FBI is dismal. They invited me once to do something, then they backed out. Eugene is their director. I know they're under fire because they're totally useless in terms of how they interact with people of color. I know they don't have enough diversity. But have you ever done anything with the police department, sheriff department, or the FBI, the local community? Because I've never seen a lot of these folks do a lot of stuff. I did do something with the police one time, and it was too painful for them to deal with. But my question is, have you done anything with them?
We have not done anything with the police department in my tenure. There was pre-pandemic a new civil rights representative in the FBI that had reached out to us about like how to opportunities for us to kind of collaborate and support, and so to ensure that there weren't kind of human rights violations happening, because he was really an amazing gentleman.
You mean in
That
the FBI had an amazing gentleman? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, he
He
was
worked in
really good.
Omaha?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah, he's not in that position because then he was only maybe in the position for 9 months or so, but I had met him because I was out tabling at a community event, and he was out at these community events
Wow.
because he was just trying to build relationship with
Wow.
communities of color, because he wanted to make sure that the people knew that the FBI was here to try to address any human rights violations that people might be experiencing. And he knew that there was a lack of trust for very good reasons, and
Well, what I just
all the
decided, it was them.
history.
Right.
Yep. And so he's like, was trying to find partners that could help be bridges between him and the community because he's like, we want to make sure that we are addressing if there are civil rights violations and human rights violations that are occurring, we should be investigating that to support those community members.
By the way, I saw their numbers is dismal. It's embarrassing. You look in terms of the number of FBI agents of color, it's comical. Again, I'm very critical of them because they've never dealt with the Martin Luther King and Malcolm X stuff. But locally, I've never seen one of them in the community in my life. I've been there all my life, except for 2 years. But again, how do you run a department or institution that you don't go and engage community leaders who are credible messengers? And so that's when I ask that question. We got about 14 minutes left, and I'll give other people a chance to ask questions. Other feedback, other reactions. Got 12 people in the system here.
It's like I either take that as a good thing that I like shared all the information you wanted to know. You're super inspired by me.
The reason I laugh is because I know a lot of the folks, we had looked at our demographics, the folks will watch this program on Facebook Live. They sometimes will not put their name in the system or say something because they work at institutions that even after working hours, sometimes you can't make comments or something because people are very reactionary. I know that. And I grew up here and I've seen folks will say things to you after the fact. So I just understand that. But that's part of what we're doing. One other question that I think that begs to this, and I think is part of this whole conversation, how do you get people to do more interracial conversations, issues? I know you have the table talk, Omaha table talk that we're a part of, but how do you do more of that? Because I know you're one of the very few organizations that are doing those kind of events where you get in a safe place and talk about race. I know most of these so-called agencies that love diversity don't do it. It's obvious, but give me a little bit more background on that.
Yeah, so we talk about create you have to create the container. If we don't create a container which is essentially making the space where we can have brave space conversations, and we refer to brave space versus safe space because we can't promise a safe space to anybody. Safety looks different for all of us.
Mm,
As a Black woman in a room, safety for me could be different as you, as a Black
that makes
male
sense.
in the
I
room.
got you.
But what we can't, and in a safe space, sometimes we may retreat into comfort and complacency. And so, but in a brave space, it's a space where you will have some heat moments and that you can be challenged, but you will know that your dignity you can still walk out and treat a person with respect, even in challenge, because that challenge is through love. And so that's kind of the environment we've created through the events. And I think by starting there to say, like, look, as long as your opinion does not degrade my humanity and you come in with the space and an openness, like every person has to come into that environment, regardless of what your opinion is, and be prepared to have a conversation. And it's like I said earlier, too many people want to talk, but they're not necessarily having a dialogue. And so the people that come into our the table talk, we try to make it really clear through our community agreements with the facilitators that we have at each table to say, like, we can have hard conversations. We can talk about stuff that is stigmatized. And in fact, like, that's the point, is to start to, because if we don't learn how to have discourse around those things that are stigmatized, they will never become unstigmatized. And some things need to stop being so taboo, and race is absolutely one of them. Like,
Mm,
if we can start to talk about race and the impacts of this construct that has been created to segregate all of us, and then has only been used furthermore to divide us by like different hierarchies, we're never going to be able to solve the problems. And so the more I get excited more and more when I talk with white folks and they'll say to me, I'm like, Black people and white people, and there's not that hesitation to say the words. Like, there's so much even just hesitation to say, well, Black people, like when they whisper it to you. And so you're like, it's okay. It's a descriptor and it's a word. So yeah.
Somebody said something here. I wanted to say, it says that IC has led conversation in my workplace in 2020, which was very powerful, and she understands the brave space. And one of the questions I will ask is related to that. I know that city hall and county government has toxic environments. I know for years the county jail has had racial issues and so on. How do you get government to do the lead? In other words, why am I paying taxes to a racist institution, organization supposed to represent all the community? So, my other question, basically, or what I'm saying is, how do we get government to be the lead? Because it's obvious in Omaha, Douglas County, they don't even have enough people of color working in key positions in both city and county government. But how do you get them to belly up and do something, especially when they're snatching our money through property tax and sales tax and elsewhere? Or can we?
I think part of it is it's going to be a mindset shift. That's what I'm starting to see, particularly in
Are
government
you saying
agencies.
mind shift in terms of the institutions or the individuals or both? I'm lost there a little bit, Kimmy.
Both,
Okay.
both. They're going to have a mindset shift in the moment, and so that's going to take time, obviously. So we're going to be playing a bit of a long game. But like the government agencies that we've partnered with or engaged with, it's generally because there is maybe a couple, like a small working group or an individual that said, we can't keep putting the same input and expecting a different output.
Hmm.
And that's a mindset. They're starting a mindset shift conversation. And so that I think is going to be the key piece for our governmental agencies is we have to recognize that we have to change the way we're operating if we want to actually accomplish the things that we're doing. Because I truly believe that no one, especially our governmental agencies, are intentionally trying to create, well, maybe not federal, but in our state and local and county, no one is intentionally trying to create harm. I think we give too much credit to malice when it's actually ignorance that is driving decision making. And if we have an opportunity to be in front of people to say, okay, let me just add a new perspective. You now have the information. Like what I can't guarantee that you know if I have not personally told you. And so I try to operate, especially when we're working with government agencies on if I have not told you, I'm going to operate from the position that you are working out of awareness, like out of unawareness of how what you're doing is impacting people of color, LGBTQ folks, people with disabilities. And so I'm going to bring you into awareness first.
Hmm.
And after I bring you into awareness, then we'll talk about what are the skills and the shifts, what is the ability of this agency to actually address it. And if once all of those three things are covered and we're still not willing to shift or actually start changing our processes, our communication, our interactions, then I go to it's a lack of willingness. And that process with any kind of power system seems to work. And we've had some progress, but the hard part about our government agencies is that leadership changes. And the moment that that leader who was willing to step into having a mindset shift type of conversation is gone, it's hard to then we have to start all over again. But and from what one of the best things that I've seen is asking them to flip the hierarchy of how they make decisions, where they put the people, the end user, the folks you're trying to support at the top of the information gathering, and then they are at the bottom of the pyramid, as opposed to it starts with them and then it trickles down to the rest of us.
Kind of like an inverted pyramid where you do what Robert Leifberg talks about servant leadership, where you get people saying, how can I be of help to you? And just because I'm elected official, I don't think I'm a god or know-it-all. Again, we have that same myopic mentality in some of these elected officials.
Yeah, and I will say to you, like one of the pieces there is that we as the society and as people have to also get rid of that mentality. We
Right.
too often wait for a leader to save us or a certain person, like, and we have to stop that. Like, we are the ones that are going to save ourselves. No one's coming to save you. And so just because you've elected somebody, they have not been deemed the fixer of all things.
Right.
It's now still your responsibility and our responsibility to show up and to push back, to hold them accountable to the things that they say they're going to do. And that would be the biggest advice that I would give to anybody running for office, especially a woman of color, is like, how do you make sure that you create accountability centers for yourself? Because there's something in that system that is set up to make us walk away from community. And so how do you create, you have to create for yourself those accountability centers to stay linked in, anchored and grounded in what is the purpose of you being there in the first place.
We got like a few minutes left. I want to give you closing
Re-
comment. Before I get there, I want to just say that in working with some of these folks, they have the intelligence of amoeba. I mean, literally, some of the stuff I've heard working inside of county government blew my mind. How people even got out of bed because there was things they would say or do or whatever that it was not indicative of the community that we serve, and particularly people who are oppressed and so on. But Cammy, we're down to the last few minutes, and I want to give you a chance. Do you have any closing comments before I make some closing comments for our participants who've been viewing this program today?
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity. Like, this is really a very challenging time for our organization. And I think for any organization that is doing race equity work, refugee work, immigrant work, um, diversity and inclusion work, like these are um, probably, well, no, I feel like I can say unprecedented in terms of how, and folks that are working in the trans and LGBTQ communities, like people are just trying to live their lives. And there are now just attacks on individuals who have been contributing to these communities, to this country, that love this country, whether they were born here, whether they came here with documents or not. And the calls and just the really hateful things that are being said about our trans community, about our immigrant and our refugee communities, like these are sometimes the best among us. And I think it's important for in these times, and I don't like the way in which we show up in our activism does not always have to be as a disruptor. It doesn't always have to be as the person protesting on the street. There are so many opportunities for a movement, and there are so many responsibilities and skills that need to be had. And so I highly encourage folks to if you're looking at like, what do I do? Because I think we can get really caught up in the distractions around this, but knowing that this movement and this work needs community. We need healers. We need connectors. We need all of these things. And so if you're trying to figure out what is your place, there's a book called The Social Justice Ecosystem. It's a guidebook. And I want to recommend that to people because doing nothing, we don't have the luxury of that anymore. But you don't have to be doing the same thing you see everyone else doing. Like you can be helping in another way. Find out where your strengths lie. And that guidebook is really valuable, I found, for folks that are wanting to do something, but maybe not necessarily be a frontline protester.
Well, I really appreciate you doing that, Cammy, and talking to our program and people in the community. Inclusive community is an important entity and so on. And really thank you for being here today and then being able to help throw some light on some of these terrible times that we're facing and will be facing, and hopefully see you guys more on the front line as we deal with some of these important issues. But thank you very much. We are going to have a couple of programs that are coming up. I just want to make an announcement before we close out. We're going to have a woman named Marlene Binden, and I only know her via the phone. Her last name is the same as mine. She lived in Kansas City. We're going to talk about genealogy and the whole issue of Ancestry.com as African Americans and people. And so that's going to be a program that's going to come up during our Black History Month event. And we're also going to have on the 19th a program about the Omaha plantation schools. I think they're totally useless in how they treat us, how they've historically treated people of color, the desegregation cases. It's going to be kind of an open conversation about the quality of education, what they're doing to and for us. And again, we're going to let people articulate some of the issues that they have not been able to articulate within those dysfunctional school boards and people who don't know how to reach out to our community. And so that's coming up, I think, on the 19th. And so we hope people join us for those two programs. Why is our history important with Marlene Binden? And then also, again, the open forum about the Omaha plantation schools and some of the things, dastardly things they've done over the years in terms of segregation and not deal with some of our community in a respective way. So we hope you will join us and participate in these events. And we call them robust discussions because, as we say on Throwing Down Some Heavy Light, we still have freedom of speech. And so we get to say anything we want to say related to challenging these archaic or oppressive systems that have kept our people tongue in cheek and not being able to go forward. So we hope you've enjoyed this edition of that. We appreciate Cammy being here today. And as we always close out, may the force be with you. Baroko.